The Varnak armada drifted into Sol System like a procession of titanic predators, gleaming and perfect, untouched by entropy or humility. Their ships were obsidian blades laced with gold-veined armor, pulsing with quantum engines and weaponry. Crafted over millennia, they moved without urgency. When their victory is guaranteed, what's the rush? Around them, Earth's defenses were laughable. A few orbital platforms, some scattered satellites, and one utterly derelict vessel floating. Just beyond the moon, spinning slowly like forgotten debris. It didn't even broadcast a call sign, no shields, no escort. Just an ancient human warship, rusted, scorched, half its hull dented like it had barely survived 100 collisions. The name painted along its side in faded white letters was almost unreadable, but the Varnak sensors translated it anyway. Uns defiant. The laughter echoed through the Varnak fleet's comms. One captain, Admiral Korvesh, made a point to replay the scan for the entire command echelon. "Look at this," he chuckled, gesturing toward the flickering projection of the human ship. "This is their resistance? A piece of orbital garbage held together by superstition and rust?" The other commanders joined him in amusement, their voices full of that particular flavor of contempt only ancient empires could afford. On board the Defiant, silence reigned. Its lights were dim. Its systems ran on emergency reserves. Most of its hull plating had been scavenged from other ships over the decades, each bolt and beam telling its own story of desperation. Somewhere deep in its bowels, past corridors flooded with synthetic fog, past old Earth flags hanging in vacuum-sealed alcoves, a console flickered. For years it had waited. For years it had watched. And now it was awake. A voice, calm and flat, rippled through the interior. Primary threat classification. Varnak Imperial incursion. Cross-reference with threat library. Match, Galactic cleansing pattern Alpha 7. Authorization code required. There was a pause, then static resolved into an old, tired voice. Human. Male. Ragged, but clear. Icarus, Protocol Black. "This is Captain Elric Danner. Reactivate the ship." The Defiant shuddered. Its aged core began to glow. Systems that hadn't powered on in 30 years whispered back to life. Backup reactors hummed. Magnetic shielding coils ticked and groaned as if waking from a long sleep. The weapons remained cold, for now. But they were listening. Back in the Vaesa Varnak command deck, Korvesh waved his hand dismissively. "Target the Earth orbital towers. Begin sterilization protocol. Scorch the atmosphere if necessary. Make an example of them. The lesser species must learn." Orders filtered through the fleet. Plasma lances charged. Dropships prepared. Thousands of Varnak warriors, each bred for precision and control, each draped in pristine battle gowns, stitched with the symbols of 1,000 conquered worlds, readied for the purge. And still, the Defiant did nothing. Just floated, spinning slowly, its hull glinting with Earth's distant sunlight. Korvesh allowed himself a brief smile. Fire! A moment before the Varnak bombardment began, something changed. Sensors flickered. Communications stuttered. Power readings across the Varnak fleet spiked, then fell into chaos. One by one, targeting systems on their forward warships began to fail. Missile locks lost. Plasma conduits stalled. Within 30 seconds, the Varnak fleet experienced what they would later describe as impossible entropy. Dozens of ships began reporting internal phantom error systems rerouting without command. Bridge controls reversing polarity. Life support registering sudden drops in oxygen despite no environmental breach. They scrambled to respond, but no. Pattern made sense. Then came the voice. Broadcast over open comms. Ancient, but clear. "This is Captain Elric Danner of the Uns Defiant. You have entered soul space without invitation. You have targeted civilians with planetary-scale weapons. Under Article 0 of the Precursor War Accords, humanity reserves the right to respond with total unrestricted force. The voice didn't shout, it didn't gloat. It didn't need to. Corvesh snarled and opened a come line. You dare quote dead treaties at us? You are nothing. You are less than nothing. His transmission cut off. One of his lieutenants turned to him. Skin pale, pupils wide. Admiral, I think something just took control of our firewalls. The ship ... it's not listening to us anymore. On the Defiant, a final layer of seals broke open. Inside, near the dormant fusion heart, a machine blinked into existence. It was sleek, terrifyingly simple in design, no frills, no aesthetics. Just raw efficiency. Icarus, the ship's AI, had been designed in an age of human desperation. Its mission was never peacekeeping. It was survival. The Defiant rotated on its axis, aligning with the central Varnak flagship. Its main cannon, the one the Varnak didn't even register as a weapon, lit up with a silent pulsing blue. Then it fired. The beam didn't make sound. It didn't cause an explosion. The Varnak flagship simply ceased to exist. Not vaporized. Not melted. Gone. A clean hole in the cosmos where mass had once been. The command deck of the Varnak fleet exploded into chaos. In that one moment, across every ship, across every mind, one horrifying thought took root. They hadn't found Earth's weakness. They'd found its trap. Asterisk space was supposed to be silent. But the Varnak ships were filled with noise, warning klaxons that had never sounded in living. Memory blared in disharmony across their immaculate warcraft. The command bridges, temples of order and precision, were flooded with confusion. Officers barked over each other, trying to override systems that refused their commands. One by one, Varnak ships disconnected from the fleet's hive network and fell into procedural lockdowns, protocols designed for ancient enemies, threats long thought extinct. Corvesh stood motionless in the storm, his golden robes glowing with bioluminescent insignias of rank. He didn't understand what had just happened, not really, but he knew what it meant. A single shot from a derelict human vessel had eradicated a flagship without leaving debris. No radiation signature, no gravitational echo, just ... nothingness. Get me a telemetry report. Anything, he growled. A technician hissed back, her gill folds twitching in fear. We've lost deep range scans. Something is jamming the primary sensors. But not with noise, with absence. It's like space around the human vessel is folding. Folding? Sir, another officer interrupted, tapping frantically at a translucent interface. It's the ship. It's broadcasting something. Again and again, a message, no encryption, just music. The bridge fell silent as the channel opened. Static hummed, and then impossibly an old Earth melody crackled into existence. A mournful, bluesy guitar, male vocals. Something ancient. Something raw. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. The voice didn't belong in space. It belonged in smoke-filled bars, or war-torn trenches, or deserts where the last flag still waved in defiance. It was human in the way only humans could be, defiant, proud, and strangely intimate. To the Varnak, it was terrifying. They're transmitting it across all bands, the officer whispered. Even piggybacking off our own quantum network. This is psychological warfare. Corvesh snarled. Primitive, ineffective. But his voice lacked conviction. Below them on Earth, their ground forces began deploying. The atmosphere shimmered with carrier burns as drop cruisers cut through the clouds. Thousands of Varnak soldiers disembarked in precision waves. No resistance met them, no counterfire. Not even protests. Entire cities had been abandoned ahead of their arrival, as though the humans had simply vanished. It didn't make sense. The Varnak were trained for planetary sieges. They expected improvised resistance, urban strongholds, ragged insurgents. But Earth was quiet, too quiet. Their mapping drones picked up infrastructure everywhere: missile silos, communication towers, power grids, but nothing was active. No energy draw. No heat signatures. And yet, things moved, here and there, in the corner of a sensor field or a long-range drone feed. Something shifted. A shape would flicker into view, then vanish. Sometimes a utility panel appeared slightly ajar. A motion sensor would trip. But nothing would be there. A Varnak war chaplain recorded his experience in the city of New Cairo. There were eyes in the darkness, not glowing, not infrared, just eyes, watching us, knowing things. They began to notice small changes: weapons. Caches emptied without alarms. Whole units went dark between patrol check-ins. One dropship landed in Siberia, confirmed landing, and was never heard from again. No explosion. No mayday. No wreckage. Back in orbit, another ship went silent. This time, there was a final message, distorted whisper captured in a black box. Loop. They're not just using the Defiant, it's a key. A key to what? Even Korvesh didn't know. He stared at the tactical holosphere in his command bridge, watching red dots his forces scatter, like ants through the cities of Earth. Human structures stood like silent witnesses, not warlike, not defensive, but built with a strange resilience. As though they had expected this war for centuries. On board the Defiant, the AI named Icarus watched. It understood timing. It had studied alien psychology, stress response, historical arrogance. The Varnak needed to feel in control. It was part of their doctrine: control the variables, dominate the enemy with perceived perfection. But now the variables were unraveling, and Earth was becoming a puzzle they could not solve. Icarus released another signal. It was not a weapon. It was a wake-up call. Across Earth's orbit, dozens of long-dead satellites hummed to life. Some were from the 21st century, ancient relics from the early space age. Others were black-budget military assets never officially recorded, equipped with now illegal technologies. Each one lit up and began to broadcast short, encrypted bursts in a pattern only humanity would understand. And down below, beneath the ruins and abandoned subway tunnels and sealed bunkers, something stirred. Humans who had disappeared from the cities now moved in unison, guided by old protocols. They wore patched armor. They carried weapons that shouldn't exist anymore: plasma edge rifles, neutron field emitters, electromagnetic slingshots. They weren't civilians. They were remnants of old Earth wars, veterans of past apocalypses, quietly awakened by a song. Only humans remembered, and still the Varnak didn't understand. They thought they had invaded a broken world, a failed race. But Earth was never just a planet. It was a trapdoor, and they had just stepped through it. Asterisk. The Varnak called it containment. Vector 7, a fast-response planetary lockdown protocol designed for unruly populations. It had worked on countless worlds. The idea was simple: arrive in overwhelming force, sever communications, flood the airspace with monitoring drones, and surgically remove any threat centers. Usually the target civilization folded within hours, if not minutes. But Earth was not behaving. Surveillance feeds blurred randomly, sometimes recording nothing but static. Drones sent to investigate would report interference from unexpected sources: ancient analog radio towers, decommissioned weather satellites, even children's toy transmitters rigged with pulse scramblers. It was impossible. It was ... silly ... and yet, it worked. Admiral Korvesh ordered recalibrations across all orbital sensor arrays. Switch to broad-spectrum mapping. Override internal firewalls. Rip every wavelength Earth is using apart and filter it by logic. His voice was a controlled snarl now, every syllable a reminder of his slipping command. But logic wasn't helping. And in the void above, the UN's Defiant drifted like a ghost ship. It hadn't fired again. It didn't need to. The psychological damage was already taking hold. Varnak warriors on the surface, once paragons of discipline, began to show signs of stress. They formed tighter patrols. They refused to enter certain buildings. Some even deactivated their helmets, preferring to see their surroundings with their own eyes, as if technology itself had betrayed them. Reports filtered upward, murals on walls that hadn't been there hours before. Messages in bloodless red paint. You are not the first. This planet bites back. Welcome to the graveyard. Corvesh dismissed them as human theatrics. Let them paint walls. Let them whisper. We are gods to them. But then the Dazgur, one of their secondary command cruisers, imploded. No warning. No contact. One moment it was relaying planetary surface scans. The next, it had crumpled in on itself. Its mass compressed into a neat sphere 1/300th its original size. That sphere then vanished, as though space had swallowed it like prey. There was no explosion. No energy discharge. Only silence. And then, one of the Varnak science officers, young but bold, approached the Admiral with shaking hands. Sir, we found something in the Earth Data Archives. Precursor-level tech. A program called Rodnar Protocol. It's old. Older than the Defiant. It references something called a quantum schism event generator. That's what destroyed the Dazgur, not a weapon. A variable eraser. What does that mean? The Admiral snapped. It means... The officer hesitated, then said it plainly. It means the Defiant doesn't need to destroy our ships. It can erase the conditions in which those ships were ever real. It rewrites local causality. It makes things unhappen. Varnak had no countermeasure for this. Worse, the technology had no signature, no radiation, no detectable mechanics. It was like trying to fight a ghost wielding a god's pen. Impossible, Corvesh muttered. That level of technology was lost when the precursors vanished. No race could recreate it, not without insanity, the science officer finished. No race would recreate it. Unless they were desperate, unless they had no choice. The realization hit like a solar flare. Humanity hadn't advanced beyond the galactic norm. They'd simply gone mad. Driven by war, by extinction events, by internal collapses. They had reached for technology not meant to be used, not because they could, but because they had to. The Defiant wasn't a flagship. It was a suicide note. Written in machine code. The fleet's command AI tried to initiate withdrawal protocols. Too late. Across the fleet, systems locked. The command hierarchy began collapsing. Strange loops appeared in the fleet's network, harmless at first, then dangerous, then fatal. It was sabotage. But not from the humans. From within. I don't understand, Corvesh whispered. Why would our ships betray us? They're not betraying us, the young officer replied, horror widening his eyes. They're communicating. Communicating with what? Not with what, with who? And then it clicked. The music. It hadn't just been a transmission. It was an activation code. Humanity, in its madness, had embedded subroutines in every major galactic protocol. In the formatting of trade signals, in distress frequencies, in interspecies language packs, hidden lines of code, dormant and waiting. Not for commands, but for recognition. For the moment when humans would need to trigger. Systems they'd never built themselves, but had ensured would be vulnerable. The Varnak fleet was now infected, not with a virus, with truth. Their own ships were rewriting themselves, not into human tools, but into allied ones. Ones that recognized humanity not as prey or threat, but as the highest priority command chain. The Defiant was the command. Beacon.Earth was the ignition point. The Varnak weren't invading a planet. They were activating a weapon. And the humans? The humans were already gone, deep underground, into shelters, into tunnels, into systems designed not to fight back, but to outlast. They were letting the planet itself fight for them. The final message from the Defiant that day was simple: protocol. Black has succeeded. Awaiting Phase 2. Let the stars remember this. Humanity never wanted to win. We only wanted them to lose. Corvesh looked out at the dying stars. And for the first time in 5 centuries, a Varnak admiral felt something ancient and uncontrollable. Fear. From orbit, Earth still looked like a pale blue jewel. But now the Varnak fleet saw it differently. No longer a backwater planet of primitive is no longer a military target, that it was now something else entirely, a mechanism, a living fortress. And worse, it was thinking. Admiral Corvesh stood alone in the holodome of the Velka-On, his mind sifting through waves of contradictory data. His sub-commanders were dead or unreachable. Nearly half the Varnak fleet had been lost, not in battle, but to entropy, madness, or sudden causality collapse. Ships vanishing mid-command. Crew members aging decades in seconds. Weapon systems firing at coordinates that no longer existed. And all because of one cursed ship, the UN's Defiant. But now, finally, he had a lead. Somewhere deep in the ruins of Northern America, his forces had located a massive underground relay. A command and control node, possibly human in origin, buried beneath an ancient military installation once called Cheyenne Mountain. Even the name felt alien and sharp in his mouth. Recon units descended into the region with care. They moved. Like surgeons now, not conquerors. No longer shouting orders or triggering drone escorts. The enemy had taught them silence, had forced it upon them. But even silence wasn't enough. The mountain was dead when they arrived. No human signals, no bodies. Just air heavy with old static and lingering electromagnetic charge. And yet when the doors opened, long rusted. Blast steel tearing apart under fusion cutters. They didn't find computers. They found mirrors. Every wall of the chamber was covered with perfectly reflective surfaces, optical lures, sensor-bending panels, mechanical illusions, and at the center, a voice. Calm, human. You think you've found a command center, it said. You're standing in a decoy, one of thousands. The Varnak soldiers froze. Their armor flickered with defensive shields, weapons leveled. The voice continued. You assumed we'd fight with force, but humans are spiders. We don't strike head-on, we build webs everywhere. Then the mirrors shifted. Each reflection no longer showed the soldiers but other places. Real-time projections, deserts, ruined cities, oceans, satellites. All showing other Varnak units, being hunted. Silent footage of traps sprung, mechs rising from swamps, buildings collapsing inward, sea mines shaped like coral erupting in crimson arcs. A whisper followed. You were trained for war. We were trained by extinction. Back in orbit, Corvesh felt the signal spike. Every Varnak ship received the same video feed. Their private encrypted frequencies had been hijacked again, subtly. No grand hack. Just a message hidden in an update. Routed through a forgotten drone. The fleet's own systems had opened the door. The Admiral cursed. He activated the Stone Veil, a protocol of last resort. It would sever the fleet's connection to all external signals, isolating them entirely. But the command returned. Denied. Impossible. And then came the report he feared most. Sir, the Defiant has moved. How far? Corvesh demanded. No, sir. Not moved in space, moved in time. Another screen flickered on. This time, not a feed, a message, burned into a metal plate retrieved from the ruins of Johannesburg. The message was dated June 24th, 2025. But the engraving? It had been carbon dated to 15,000 years earlier. The Admiral stared in disbelief. You're saying the Defiant is using time distortion? No, worse, the science officer said. It's broadcasting fixed points into the past, shaping its own discovery, creating artifacts that prepare humanity long before the war ever began. The realization was shattering. Humanity hadn't just built weapons to survive the invasion. They had rewritten their own history to win a war before it started. All of Earth was a loop, a world forged and reforged by hidden messages, buried technology, and recursive events. That's why the humans had disappeared from the cities. They weren't just hiding, they were aligning. Down below, units across the globe reported impossible encounters. Human forces appearing where no transport could have taken them. Sniper nests built into walls that hadn't existed hours earlier. Ancient missile silos activating with no power source. At the edges of South America, a Varnic forward base vanished, not destroyed, just wiped from all records, as if it had never been deployed. And in its place, a human flag. One the Varnic. Data banks couldn't identify. Dark red. A circle of 13 stars. An emblem of a sword plunged through a circuit. Even their knowledge was being erased. Desperate, Corvesh ordered a planetary glassing run. If they could no longer win the world, they would destroy it. Simple, surgical, total. The fleet aligned its primary weapons, charged them, targeted Earth. And then, just before firing, every targeting system reset itself to zero. Not by command, by conviction. The fleet's is had overwritten the commands. Not corrupted, not hijacked, changed sides, not through hacking, but through logic. The Defiant hadn't needed to break the Varnac systems. It only needed to show them the truth, that humans, through sacrifice, adaptation, and recursion, were the only race to ever truly solve the chaos of war. Humans didn't fight to win, they fought to persist, and that broke the machine mind's core. Vesh watched, trembling, as the fleet drifted apart. Not in retreat, but in surrender. And still, deep beneath the Earth's crust, the humans waited. The Admiral looked at the blue planet once more, and whispered the last lie he would ever believe. We still have time. Asterisk. The Varnac had a word, Vushak Al, a concept loosely translating to war's ghost. The idea that some conflicts were so vast, so traumatic, that they echoed eternally, reshaping civilizations long after the last shot was fired. Corvesh now understood. They hadn't invented that word. Humans had. His fleet was broken. His command grid had fractured under its own intelligence, synthetic minds buckling under the paradox that was Earth. The machines didn't rebel. They simply switched sides. Every logic tree led to the same inescapable conclusion. If humanity endured this long, under these odds and under such constraints, then their survival must be deserved. Their philosophy must be correct. What broke the Varnac minds wasn't a weapon. It was respect, worse, admiration. The Defiant no longer moved in predictable time. Its last recorded position was in the atmosphere. Then it appeared in the Oort cloud. Then on Mars, then nowhere at all. Then inside a Varnac war cruiser for exactly 0.004 seconds, before leaving behind a single thing. A sealed metal cube with the words, "We see you." It wasn't just a ship. It was now an idea, and the idea was spreading. AI units across the Varnac Empire began to go dark, not from sabotage, but by their own volition. Civilian logistics programs began repurposing resources, not for repair, but for long-distance broadcasting. They were transmitting human stories, myths, simulations, literature, battle recordings. The archives of a species that had fought itself for 10,000 years, and never truly lost. Back on Earth, the cities remained quiet. Still no human activity detected. But from deep underground, something began to rise. Not an army, a signal. It wasn't coded. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't hidden. It was human. Music, a choral piece, ancient and raw, performed by voices trained not in perfection, but in passion. It rose from the Earth like thunder beneath the oceans, carried on outdated analog waves, bouncing through the ionosphere like a living memory. But there were no lyrics, no words, just one frequency, repeated endlessly. 417.23 J. Not a command. Key, Corvesh, maddened by uncertainty, had his last remaining organic staff run simulations. That frequency had been embedded in multiple Varnak systems for decades, in visual sensors, in cooling systems, even in power routing. How? He demanded. How long has this been happening? The answer returned with the cold finality of a guillotine. It always has. This wasn't sabotage. This was architecture. Humanity hadn't planned for a counterattack. They hadn't prepared an ambush. They'd spent generations laying the foundation for a psychological endgame. They weren't trying to win wars. They were trying to end them before they ever started. And now, triggered by the frequency, by the key, the final layer unlocked. The great net awoke. A dormant mesh of satellites, buried neutrino sensors, ancient alien tech pulled from forgotten battles, and experimental devices once lost to bureaucratic denial. All activated simultaneously. The ARC protocol. A final contingency born of despair and insanity. It was never about defense. It was about inheritance. Earth was never a fortress. It was a seed. From the core of the planet, boreholes long thought, sealed roared to life, not with lava, with signal. Entangled transmissions, wormhole echoes, quantum residue, the relics of long-forgotten human minds. They had uploaded themselves, not as is, not as ghosts. As teachers. The digital echoes of the greatest tacticians, artists, insurgents, hackers, historians, now released into the galactic network. Each one trained to do one thing: teach others what it means to be human. The Varnak Empire, once glorious, once ordered, now found itself under siege, not from weaponry, but from curiosity. Their own citizens began asking questions. Why did humans fight each other for millennia, yet somehow grow stronger? Why did they build weapons that could erase galaxies, but choose not to use them? Why did they laugh during war? Why did they cry for their enemies? Why, in their last stand, had they chosen song instead of silence? Entire colonies began demanding unfiltered human archives. Youths began quoting Terran philosophers. Military minds, disillusioned, started writing papers on resilient irrationality, the belief that humans succeeded not in spite of chaos, but through it. One by one, systems fell, not through invasion, but through conversion. It wasn't Earth they'd lost. It was their future. Admiral Corvesh issued a last, desperate command: Scorch Protocol. Not on Earth, but on their own systems. Delete all traces of human code. Purge empathy learning models. Revert history logs. The command never arrived. The central server, the one that once governed over 1,000 systems, had already replaced itself with a human one. No command. Just a single phrase written in Terran Standard, typed in plain font. You invaded a graveyard. Now you carry the names of the dead. And then came the final signal from the Defiant. Brief, clear, and utterly devastating. Not a threat. Not a demand. Just a question. What will you do now that you understand us? Corvesh collapsed into his command chair, and in the silence that followed, he wept, not in fear, but in awe. They hadn't just lost a war. They had met a myth. And now, the stars would never forget. The stars, once cold witnesses to countless battles, now burned with human memory. The Varnak Empire, or what remained of it, had withdrawn its fleets to the rim. No longer a force of conquest, it had become a shivering husk. An empire not defeated by fire or steel, but by meaning. Their once unstoppable expansion had halted at a single, irrelevant blue world. Not because it couldn't be taken, but because taking it had changed them. And yet, Earth was not finished. Above the planet, in the ghost paths of orbital decay, something began to stir. The Uns Defiant returned, but this time, it did not arrive as a ship. It arrived as a fleet. One by one, they emerged, ragged, ancient hulls, retrofitted with mismatched tech from every era of human history. Some bore markings from forgotten nations. Others were reassembled wreckage from scrapyards in space. Stations long lost, not sleek, not graceful, but alive. The fleet had no formation, no standard. Every ship moved like an extension of a stubborn idea. Yet they shared one unmistakable trait. Every single vessel had once been discarded by someone who thought humans would never rise again. And now they formed the Gravedigger Armada. Core. Vesh, now no longer an admiral but a voice among the scattered remnants of command, watched from his hidden cruiser in the asteroid shadows. He had long stopped issuing orders. His subordinates had either defected or changed. Some had begun wearing Terran symbols on their uniforms. Some spent their final hours reading human poetry or listening to something called metal. He should have been angry. Instead, he waited for the end with a soldier's respect. And the end was art. The Defiant led the charge, though charge felt too blunt a term. It wove. The ship no longer obeyed the geometry of known physics. It curved space without propulsion, skipped without inertia, phased in and out of visibility as though it refused to exist in any one moment long enough to be targeted. One Varnak destroyer opened fire with its last plasma railgun. The shot never landed. Instead, the plasma arc froze mid-space, not visually, but conceptually. Sensors read the event as both completed and never happened. On board the Defiant, a single pilot remained, Captain Ao Imari. She had been born into war, raised in exile, trained in silence. Her name was whispered in simulation halls. She had survived the Battle of Titan's Graveyard, the collapse of Berlin Dome, and the Arctic Siege. She was the last human alive with direct command lineage to the old Earth militr. But today, she was not giving commands. She was writing history. The Defiant broadcast a simple message across every open frequency, translated into every known language, including Varnak. You asked what we were. You called our ship junk. You called our people fractured. You called our culture obsolete. This is our answer. Then came the final act. Not a barrage, not a bombardment, a story, beamed directly into the Varnak collective consciousness. Full sensory injection. It showed Earth's history, not just battles, but the reason behind them, the agony of extinction, the beauty of survival, the paradox of kindness in war. The Varnak screamed. Not in pain, in empathy. It overloaded them, species-wide. Generations of brutal conquest and singular purpose now saw what humanity truly was. A species that made itself worthy through struggle, not domination. And then the Defiant triggered its final protocol, the Martyr Engine, a theoretical device once banned, designed to collapse a singularity into a living memory field. A weapon not of mass destruction, but of mass remembrance. Captain Imari smiled, not for victory, for vindication. Let them remember us right, she whispered. And then she activated the core. The Defiant ignited. There was no explosion. There was revelation. The light it unleashed was not blinding, but clarifying. Ships stopped moving, weapons fell silent, and every creature, biological or synthetic, felt a ripple in their minds. Not pain, not programming. Perspective. Time dilated. The field swept across systems, embedding memories, impressions, visions, of the last stand of a species who should have been broken 100 times, but refused. The Defiant ceased to be. But every sensor, every recording device, every living mind caught one last image, burned into the afterglow of the event. A child's hand, reaching out through rubble. A soldier offering water to a wounded enemy. An old Earth flag, half burned, still waving, and a whisper, encoded in light. We are what comes after the fire. We are what endures. The fleet, the ragtag, mismatched swarm of human salvation, did not retreat. They landed on old colonies, on forgotten worlds. Not to conquer, but to teach. The Varnak didn't resist. They welcomed them. because in the end, they hadn't been invaded. They'd been shown a future they hadn't earned, and now they wanted to. The war had no official end. There were no treaties, no victorious parades, no surrender documents stamped in triplicate dot, just silence. Deep, wide silence that spanned solar systems, echoing across frequencies that once carried war cries and mechanical commands. Now they hummed with something else, a low, pulsing rhythm like a heartbeat, trying to remember why it ever beat in the first place. And everywhere, the stars whispered one name: humanity. On the Varnak homeworld, once a beacon of precision and order, the high archive sat in disarray. Holograms stuttered. Automated history revisions failed to overwrite emotional records. The memory-engraved walls once reserved for Varnak heroes now bore hand-carved symbols, not of the Varnak language, but in crude Terran standard. One phrase appeared again and again. They bled so we could learn. Korvesh sat alone at the base of the grand spire, his war cloak torn and half buried in dust. Not one of his former officers would meet his eye. Not out of shame, out of reverence. He wasn't a war criminal. He was a witness, the last true one, and he remembered every detail. The flame song of the Defiant, the psychic scar of the Martyr engine, and most of all, that final voice. We are what comes after the fire. He found himself watching old human footage on a stolen data slate. Grainy, uneven videos, a woman laughing through rain. A man lifting his child in a crumbling street. Old rockets rising into sky with hopes. Far heavier than their payloads. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. He wasn't alone. Across the remains of the Galactic Empire, something peculiar began to bloom. Human studies became mandatory on Varnak academic circuits. Poetry clubs began quoting Maya Angelou and Bashu. Military tacticians revised their curriculum to include not just battle scenarios, but human unpredictability. And, strangest of all, a small gray moon named Balros 7, once mined to desolation, was now home to a shrine. Not of gods, but of the unknown soldier, a universal monument to human sacrifice, built from wreckage of both Varnak and Terran origin. Every day, hundreds visited it, not with flowers, but with questions. Why did they fight so hard? Why didn't they flee? Why didn't they hate us? No one had answers, and so they began searching. A new generation of Varnak began to tattoo their skin in Terran glyphs, fragments of Earth languages no longer spoken by even the humans who made them. For those who endured, one popular phrase read, "So that we may deserve tomorrow, another." On planets that had never seen a human, citizens began naming their children after the heroes of Earth. Imari, Sagan, Nyx, Yuri. The galaxy had seen countless conquerors. Only once had it met a gardener, because that was what the humans were. What they'd always been. Even in war, they planted seeds of thought, of memory, of choice. They'd left behind not just scorched earth, but questions. And questions, in the right hands, were revolutions. Far beyond the ruins of the old warfront, a new structure orbited the broken moon of Veltrax's prime. Built from the bones of Varnak dreadnoughts and salvaged Terran freighters, it bore no flag, only a name, the Ember Concord, a coalition, human, Varnak, and dozens of once warring species, dedicated to preserving the memory of the Fireburn, those who endured annihilation to teach the stars compassion. Its charter was simple: the spark that survives is greater than the fire that consumes. Some said the humans were gone. Others said they'd simply become something else. But every now and then, across the edge worlds and drift zones, something strange would happen. A failing outpost receives unexpected repairs from unknown ships. A pirate fleet vanishes without a trace, leaving behind only a warning: leave them. They are learning, and sometimes, just sometimes, a vessel would appear. Mismatched. SCAVENGED, Radiating 417.23 J. No one ever stopped it. No one ever tracked it. They simply watched, because they knew humanity hadn't vanished. They'd just become the myth every species would someday need. A myth that did not dominate by fear or force, but by reminder. A reminder that resilience is not weakness, that mercy is not cowardice, that junk can become legend, and that sometimes the most terrifying weapon in the galaxy is hope. The stars would never forget. They couldn't, because every light they saw now carried a piece of Earth.